Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to briefly analyze the key tactical theme in Arsenal's 2-0 win over Aston Villa. So in today's video, first we're going to focus on Villa's defensive shape, then we'll focus on Arsenal's activity in the wider areas, along with Rice's positioning and how it was integral. So when we break it all down and we do look at the board, we have Arsenal in a 4-3-3, with Arteta's sole change being Timber shifting into the left back role, and Aston Villa starting in a 4-2-3-1 that became two banks of four out of possession. So first we'll focus on Villa's defensive shape, as it did present some issues for Arsenal, and it starts with Timber following in Zinchenko's footsteps in the left back role as he was inverting in towards a central position, and Arsenal were more of a 3-2-5 in terms of their build-up. Now when you focus on Villa, they dropped off into two banks of four, and it was clear that they wanted Watkins and Rodgers to sit on Thomas Partey and Timber, deny them service in towards those central areas, and then they could simply have Onana and Tielemans tracking the movement of Odegaard and Rice to ensure that Arsenal's box midfield couldn't dominate the center of the pitch. With Timber moving into that central role, now you could have Bailey and McGinn stepping towards White and Gabriel, and that could leave Rodgers or Watkins stepping towards Saliba, and then they could simply block off the passing lane in towards Thomas Partey or Timber to ensure that they couldn't receive the ball in those central areas. Villa's shape would force Odegaard and Rice to shift towards the wider areas to attempt to receive the ball freely, and we've witnessed them do that against Wolves and Lyon within the last few weeks. But here, rather than having Onana and Tielemans dragged out and towards those zones, they simply had McGinn and Bailey stepping towards Gabriel and White if they got on the ball, but if they didn't, then they could simply have them tucking in and ensuring that Odegaard and Rice receive pressure. If they did have to step towards the ball, they would simply block off the passing lane in towards Rice and Odegaard to deny them service in those zones. If Timber didn't invert into central areas, they could simply have Bailey stepping towards him to apply pressure, and then that would leave Watkins and Rodgers in between Thomas Partey. Just in case Odegaard dropped off into central areas as well, they could simply have one of them stepping towards one of the center backs and block off the passing lane into Odegaard, or simply replicate what they were doing with Timber and have Watkins and Rodgers closing down Odegaard and Thomas Partey while Tielemans held a central position. In many respects, Havertz could cause a similar impact by dropping off deeper, as neither Aston Villa center back would step forward to apply pressure, but in the case that Timber was in a left back position, Bailey could step towards him, and then with Havertz dropping off into that midfield zone, if Odegaard pushed forward, Tielemans could follow him, and then Onana would deal with Havertz, or vice versa. If you had Onana stepping forward to close down Odegaard, then you would have Tielemans sticking towards Havertz. And really the only issue that Arsenal presented here was that Rice was now pushing forward into that gap between the center back and the full back, and it could create 2v1s if Arsenal switched the ball out quickly towards the left hand side, but we didn't see them do that on a consistent basis. The other alternative here would simply to have Pau Torres tracking the movement of Havertz in towards that midfield zone, but Villa were wary of the threat of Martinelli and Saka breaking in behind, and they wanted to ensure that the center backs remained in their own position and simply had the fullbacks tracking their movement as well to make up the numbers. In many scenarios where they had Havertz dropping in towards that midfield zone and Rice and Odegaard staying aligned, they simply had Onana sticking with Rice, then they could push Tielemans towards Havertz and then have McGinn tucking in to close down Odegaard. In any other scenario, they could have McGinn tucking in closer towards Odegaard to help out Tielemans in that position, but it was in the second half where we witnessed Arsenal creating a bit more issues, and that was simply due to Rice pushing forward into that gap between the fullback and the center back, and then when Havertz dropped deeper, it was Onana tracking his movement, and then that would create avenues to play switches out towards Martinelli on a consistent basis. However, while Villa did a very good job of disrupting Arsenal's build-up, Arsenal were still able to get into good positions, and once again, a lot of it stemmed down the wider areas in contrasting manners. Down the left-hand side, it was Rice's positioning, whereas on the right-hand side, it was Ben White pushing forward to help Saka get into better positions. However, the greatest thing about Arsenal's attacking play here was that the productivity in both wide areas did go hand in hand, where Arsenal were able to get Saka into 1v1s against Lucas Dean or McGinn due to White on the overlap or the underlap with Odegaard pushing forward. On the left-hand side, Martinelli was often free due to the fact that Rice and Havertz were pushing into advanced positions, and Onana wasn't helping out Konsa and the right back. It also helps that Timber was in a narrow position in that back three or in an inverted position, and Bailey wasn't looking to track back, so he was often caught higher up the pitch. So here the aerial threat of Havertz and Rice at the back post were occupying two and at sometimes three defensive players for Villa just to ensure that they weren't able to isolate a marker, and that left space for Martinelli to break free at the back post. The issue Arsenal had here was that when Rice Rice wasn't making that forward movement. Martinelli was often in 1v1s that shifted into 1v2s or 1v3s, and his production in those wider areas was subpar once again, as he often struggled to get a cross in towards one of his teammates or into the box in general, and his attempt to break towards the byline was unsuccessful as well. However, when Onana or Bailey tracked the movement of Rice getting into advanced positions, Villa often did a much better job of protecting that side of the pitch, but you could see the impact if simply Odegaard shifted towards the left to drag away Onana, or simply Rice and Havertz making forward runs to pull away the center back. Then that would create an overload down that left-hand side to help Martinelli break forward, or simply get Rice and Havertz into advanced positions. One of Arsenal's better chances in that opening half stemmed with Rice getting away from Onana and splitting Bailey in the fullback to find Martinelli free in left half space. But from that position with the fullback retreating, he slid the ball across towards Havertz, breaking free in the 6-yard area, but Havertz was unable to test the keeper. Whereas on the right-hand side, simply having White looking to make underlapping and overlapping runs on a consistent basis freed up space for Odegaard and Saka to get away from Lucas Digne or Tielemans. It created 3v3s down that side, and White was able to drag away markers with his movement, and then you had to respect Odegaard at the edge of the box, so now Saka was able to get himself in 1v1 situations where he could cut on towards his left foot to serve as a goal threat. In the same breath, the other issue that Arsenal created here was that Thomas Partey was pushing into advanced positions in the final third, and now that forced Onana to shift across to help out Tielemans as he was overloaded in that area. So now you had Onana and Tielemans stepping towards Odegaard and Thomas Partey. That created a 4v4 battle down the right-hand side, and that was a contributing factor to the overload at the back post, with Havertz and Rice pushing forward to occupy the fullback and the center back. Now Martinelli was free at the back post, and the sole issue that Arsenal encountered here was that when they delivered crosses in towards that penalty area for Havertz, Martinelli, or Rice, they simply lacked the execution, and Villa's defenders were able to clear danger. We could focus on one breakdown in particular with Thomas Partey in the halfway circle, bypassing the midfield bank to find Havertz dropping off the center backs, and he combined with Odegaard, who was beyond Tielemans, and from there Odegaard was able to slide the ball across Lucas Digne for Saka, and when Saka received the ball, he was able to cut in across the fullback or drop the ball off towards Odegaard. But what ended up happening in that situation was that they dragged away McGinn, Tielemans, and Lucas Digne and dropped the ball off towards White, but focus on the movement in the box. Havertz dragged away the center backs and Onana was caught out of position, but now you can see the 2v1 at the back post with Rice's movement and Martinelli breaking free at the back post, and unfortunately for Arsenal, White's cross was poor and Villa were able to clear their line. Ultimately, Arsenal continued to spam these rotations on the right-hand side in the second half, with White pushing forward on the overlap and the underlap, and you can continuously see 3v3s and 4v4s being created, and ultimately Arsenal created one of their better chances from this flank as it was Saka in a central position with White on the overlap, and Saka played the ball in towards Odegaard, and from there Odegaard was able to hold off pressure, retain possession, and drag away Tielemans, Lucas Digne, and the center back, and no one was tracking the movement of Saka as McGinn was occupied by White's overlapping run, and Odegaard placed Saka in a legitimate goal-scoring position, but he was unable to beat the keeper. However, this was a reoccurring issue throughout that second half when Arsenal got into good positions, and when you break down the two goals, they follow similar elements. The first one is Odegaard's reverse pass across Ramsey and Ben White's underlapping position for Saka running off his marker, and Saka's able to pull the ball back across Lucas Digne and Tielemans, and it falls into the path of Havertz, who pokes it in the direction of Trossard, and you could see that due to Havertz and Rice making that forward movement towards the 6-yard area, you could see that Trossard's able to find some space away from Bailey, who wasn't looking to track the movement of any runs throughout that game, and Trossard was able to produce a fine finish to beat the keeper. And then for the second goal, it's Gabriel stepping in towards Villa's half, Rice's positioning occupying the center back and the fullback, and now it's Trossard breaking in behind to receive the ball over the top. Trossard breaks free into left half space. His cross is poor, but Saka's able to retrieve it, and now you see the overlapping run from White once again, Odegaard in the penalty area, and Saka's able to drag away markers towards him and pull the ball back towards Thomas Partey unmarked at the edge of the box to finish superbly to kill off the game. So as you can see, despite some defensive lapses in their own third, Arsenal presented some clear routes to goal that simply lacked elite execution here.